Darling, do you get dizzy spinning on your pole or apparatus? I've got some good tips for you today. Something that you want to keep in mind when you're starting to learn spinning moves, if you haven't done this before, whether it's spinning or going upside down, it can be very disorienting. So we want to go nice and slow into these movements. If you find that you're starting to spin and go upside down and move around and you feel a little bit dizzy or overwhelmed, sometimes we can feel nauseated. Unfortunately, that can happen. Just know that that's not abnormal, and it's something that our body will adjust to as we continue to practice. The key that I want to recommend, if that's the case, is to go very slow. Our bodies are very sensitive to how we're wired to being upright and moving about the world in our vertical position. Once we start to change that, even just to here, let alone to here, our brain does a little bit of a hiccup, as well as the fluid in our body, and it takes a little bit of time for our nervous system to rewire a bit around that. So if you find that's happening, I recommend staying off of the spin pole initially. Take your time going around very slowly, walking in your spins as well as taking it into your dips and your other movements very slowly. If that feels good, start with a very slow spin. So the same rules apply for if you're going upside down and you find that that dizziness happens. We want to go nice and slow, whether it's a forearm stand or a handstand or headstand. We want to take our time in getting to that position. Again, we're so used to being wired here. Also, we're pretty good here, but some people get even a little bit dizzy here. So taking our time, starting here, and gradually working our way to having our head up, head below our hips can take a little bit of time. Going into our downward dog is a really good place to start getting used to that. Start letting your head really drop down. This is a great one because it also starts to build my shoulder strength. So just going into this position, I can even drop my knees and just kind of start here if it's really overwhelming. I can also take it to my forearms and work on stacking that way. The key is to use your breath while we're in these positions and to make sure we're aware of where we are. See if you can really orient yourself. Look at parts of your body that you're used to recognizing and looking at, and that will help you really integrate into where you are in space in that position. One other thing that I love to do, it's actually a yoga move, and this is amazing for if you need an afternoon pick-me-up. It also feels amazing on the spine as well as the legs and hips, but we're going to stand with our legs nice and wide. I recommend doing this with heels out, slight pigeon-toed, and I like to modify it a little bit from how most yoga practices will teach it. I'm going to say bring those hips back and soften those knees and let those hands really support you here. So dropping yourself down slowly upside down is going to be so good for decompressing your spine and for getting your head and your head fluids used to moving around this way. While we're upside down, I'm going to look left to right and just kind of see where I'm oriented. I can look towards the sky and look towards the floor. You can kind of bend those knees and shift those hips and get an excellent stretch at the same time. But letting yourself breathe and be upside down here is really going to help you get used to all of that upside down stuff happening in the air. So another one of my favorite pointers once we start getting on our pole or apparatus in a spin is to stay focused on something really close and relative to us rather than letting ourselves spin around the room. So for example, if I'm going to do a climb and a spin, I'll set it up. And once I get into this, I might look at the pole itself. I might look at my elbow or my wrist rather than outside of the room. Or I can keep my eyes a little bit lower, looking at my knees as I'm moving around. If I look at my hand, this is something that I'm used to looking at, it kind of stabilizes me. Also, if I start going upside down here or doing different things with my energy in my head, that's going to start changing how I feel. So be careful adding that spin and that upside down in the same pass if we're not used to it. And sometimes what happens is we can get a little bit nauseated. Unfortunately, that can happen with the dizzy sensation. So sometimes when that happens, what it is that fluid in our ears, and it's normal for this to get a little bit off, and if we're not used to moving, our body isn't used to that just yet. What we want to do is settle that fluid as quickly and efficiently as possible. A good way to do that is to come to a standing position. Make sure that your hips are nice and neutral and your back is long and supported and elongated. Our abs are engaged. I'm going to simply lift my heels and drop them. It's a lift and a heel drop. Make sure your knees are not hyperextended. I've got soft knees, and I'm going to drop those heels. You're going to feel that throughout the body, and it's just going to kind of settle that down. It has a very grounding effect as well. My last recommendation, if you do have a little bit of nauseousness, ginger and ginger candy, ginger shots, ginger chews, that does help, and those are pretty tasty as well. So these are my spinning tips, darling. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you can give these a shot, and happy spinning.